Got it. Thank you so much, Prakash, and welcome everybody once again to Behavioural Science Club. For those of you who are new to us, you are very welcome. For those names that I recognise, pictures of people I can see, you are so very welcome. Thank you for coming and joining us each week. Those of you who have enough bandwidth, pop on your cameras because we love to see your smiling faces. And this week we are delighted to have join us Silvia Cottone. And Silvia is first and foremost a behavioural scientist. She is a consultant at B-Way, which I think, she can correct me, I think it stands for Behavioural Way, a financial services consultancy in Madrid. She's also a lecturer in behavioural economics at UCAL. And Prakash put 3 super questions in the poster for the event. Are the principles of behavioural science universal? Do frameworks and biases translate the same way across cultures? And how is Latin America using behavioural science? Well, Silvia put a super essay up recently, and we'll have to share the link to it for everybody afterwards. Diversification in behavioural science, why is it important? And that's exactly what Silvia is going to speak with us about today. So please do join us, Silvia. You're very welcome.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much everybody to be here. I'm very glad. It's also the 50th episode, so it's very nice to be here and celebrate it with all of you. I like to have mostly a chat. I know that I'm going to share something with you, some thoughts, but it's mostly a topic that I would like to discuss, as I want to know your opinions as well. I think there is not an absolute answer, so definitely I want to hear you out, and I will start with some presentation, and then I will also make some questions to you, and I really want you to, I don't know, take notes or think about it a little bit, and at the end of the presentation we can talk about it and discuss it, okay?
Great, thanks so much, Silvia. We're looking forward to it.
Great. Then I think I can start sharing. So we can start if everybody's ready. Okay. So basically, this is something that I've been thinking about already in the last year, because I think during the pandemic, it's a topic that started to be more discussed among the behavioral science community. So I started to investigate a little bit more. Because also I'm teaching in a university in Lima in Peru, and my students sometimes ask me this kind of question. So I started to wonder and try to have some opinions about how can we consider the cultural in when we do behavioral research. And to start talking about this topic, I would like to start seeing a little bit now the scenario of behavioral science around the world, considering not just weird, but also not weird countries. And we're going to see also what it means. So I would like to start with this map. There was a map created by the OECD in 2018, so 3 years ago almost. And it shows all the people around, all the organizations around the world, mainly public organizations, they were applying behavioral science at that time. And as we can see, there is a majority of organizations applying behavioral science, specifically in the USA or in Europe or Western country mainly. And I made not a scientific calculation, of course, it's not like a scientific research or anything, but about 11 organizations were applying behavioral science in Latin America at that time. And of course, it seems like a little number, but actually if you consider how recent the discipline is, then we can see that it's actually growing pretty fast, and there is a real interest already in 2018. And then recently I found out about another map that was created by Action Design. And here they also try to collect all the organizations, private and public, that are applying behavioral economics until last year. Probably they will update it as well soon. And I saw that 25 behavioral science teams were already created in Latin America. So there was a little bit of, let's say, an increase, the number increased a little bit. But if we consider this number compared to the teams that are applied behavioral science in the US, or for example, specifically just in the UK, the number seems a little bit small, okay? And still, it looks like a good number because there is a big interest, especially in Latin America. Over the last 3 years, it has increased so much. So it's actually very good to see how much people want to know about it and also how much they want to apply it. But why is this important? It's important to consider how many people or how many organizations or team exist in different parts of the world. Of course, this can be applied in any other part of the global south, no other countries, but I focus on Latin America because I mainly work in Latin America. And the importance here stands because there are, of course, organizations from US or European countries that are applying behavioral science in projects in Latin America or other global South countries. But the problem here is that sometimes when we apply behavioral science in projects from an outside organization or team, then we miss out some local characteristics that are very important when we are applying behavioral science. So sometimes we don't think, like as a local things, or we don't know how they feel or why they behave in a way. So it's very important to have to have someone that knows this kind of thing, so that we can trust and say, okay, they live there, they know it, and they can actually tell us what are these local characteristics that sometimes we're missing. And this is, let's say, the basic. And this, I started to think about it for two reasons, because we know that behavioral science wants to or tries to understand how people make decisions. But we also have to consider that not all the people are the same, and also we all not act in the same ways. And this depends on the culture or the context we're living in. So starting with these 2 points, I want to talk about these two things. One is that not all people are the same, and we talk about sample diversification. And the next one will be context diversification, and we will see what it means. So sample diversification, I started to think about it when I read this well-known article, The Weirdest People in the World. It's a very interesting article. It was written already 10 years ago, well, 11 years ago. So it's a topic that it's been there already for quite a while, right? And in this paper, well, first we have to see what weird means, because they say the weirdest, right? And weird refers to societies that are Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. So it has very specific part of society, right? It has specific characteristics. And in this paper, what they say is that when we consider the majority of psychology or behavioral science research, the people that are studied are mainly coming from samples from these weird societies. So from this part of, from these specific parts of the world, right? And if we consider this kind of countries, for example, North America or Europe, in reality, they just have only they represent only 12% of the world population. So they don't represent the variety of the world. But still, the studies that we have about psychology and behaviors is mainly coming from this country. They even state that they come from even students from university, from North America, but of course, this is something still more specific, but we maintain it to weird societies. And so what it means that if we consider that the majority of the samples studied are coming from this kind of societies, is that the database of the research in behavioral science that we have comes from a very narrow segment of human diversity. So when I started to read these things, I also started to tell it to my students. We started to ask ourselves, so how representative are these members of the entire population, right? If we just consider weird people, how can we generalize our results? How can we say that these things that we found out are applying also to other parts of the people coming from other parts of the world? and started to think about it. We also started to think, more related to our discipline, we started to think about, are cognitive biases universal? Like, can we say that all the biases that exist, that people have, that I've been studying, are universal and everybody has the same cognitive biases, I would like you to think about it. And I'm also not an expert, so I think that we're all equal here. Like my research or my studies and my work is not based on cultural differences, but of course I work in a different country. I'm Italian, I work in Peru and other Latin America countries, so it's something that affects me quite a lot. But I would like you to think of your answer, or what would you say if someone asked you this question, right? And we can discuss at the end, but I want to share with you my idea. And I think that there is not enough evidence to say it, because there is not enough experimentation in different cultures to say, okay, cognitive biases are universal, and in everybody or in everywhere in the world we are affected by the same biases. And of course, why is it important to consider this? First of all, regarding to sample diversification, I think the important thing here is to understand how different psychological or behavioral phenomena differs with different samples. So we have to, of course, start experimenting with different samples and understanding how they make decisions in order to be able to apply behavioral science more locally, so related to different people. But in this case, even if we start experimenting or in some ways testing with different samples, there is always something missing. And here I make an example that when I was working at Heuristica, a behavioral science consulting agency in Peru, we tried to experiment some behavioral science principles in a national survey. So we tried to see specifically if the Peruvian, not with a Peruvian sample, if they were affected by the present bias. And of course, we can talk about it because there are different things that can lead to these different results. But what we found out is that the Peruvian sample didn't have or wasn't affected by the present bias. And we cannot say, oh, okay, so the present bias is not universal, or just the Peruvians are not affected by the present bias. We cannot say it because there is something else missing. And this something else, I think, is exactly the context diversification, which can have two meanings. And one relates to the fact that we have to diversify, in different cultures, experiment with different cultures and different contexts. But as Busara Center puts it, it also means that we have to make measures. So for example, when we are measuring the present bias, we have to make these measures contextually appropriate in order to run a sensible test. And this means that we cannot just take the original paper or the original experiment and just test it with another sample, because most probably the results will be different. And there is this paper by Busara Center. They're doing a great job to include this cultural aspect in behavioral science research. And in this article, they discussed about 3 different experiments that they did. And the first one was with the decoy effect. And they were arguing that you cannot show, like, to a small village in Kenya the same measures you're using with an US population, because in this case, you cannot tell the people in this village in Kenya to pay $135 of subscription for a newspaper, because the average earning that they have is $100. So of course you have to make it more appropriate to their realities. And also when they did this experiment where they were testing the Linda problem, and in this case, they tried to adapt the problem, creating the Mary problem, so to a girl that it's most similar to the people they were showing to. And what they saw is that making the measures culturally appropriate and contextually appropriate resulted in a gain of comprehension also of the test itself. So this, if people comprehend the tests better, then of course we can also achieve better results. So in this case, I think this is also very important, because if we connect it to the present bias example that I was making with the Peruvian sample, doesn't mean that they are not affected by present bias. Maybe we should have made the measures contextually appropriate, so the test would have run probably better. Of course, the situation was also different because it was also COVID time, so maybe people changed their preference according also to the situation we were living. Or in another talk that I was giving in Madrid a few weeks ago, some people suggested as well that maybe the way we presented the test, because this test, they were participating in a survey, and maybe in the original paper they were presented in a different way. So there are different things, of course, that we have to consider. But then when we think about the cultural aspect of this, then we don't only have to consider the sample, no, experimenting with different samples. This is my takeaway in here, but also with different context and with making measures contextually appropriate. And in this way, now if we do both, it's very important, because in this way we can understand how psychological or behavioral phenomena can actually change in different cultures. We can actually start it making locally appropriate changes in the tests and in the experiments. Now, these are the two main ideas that I know by searching and by talking to people I came up with and I read about. And of course, now it's, okay, what's the solution then, right? And here as well, I would like you to think about it, because I think there can be different solutions, but of course, I'm very open to see your opinions, to see how we can reduce this gap between cultural characteristics that are not yet being included in the behavioral science research. But one of the things that I like and that I listened last year actually at the Now Fest organized by Prakash, when Dilip Soman talked about actually the same topic, and he suggested this example. Basically, he's saying that when we are designing, now as behavioral science experts, when we're designing intervention, we have to be like tailors. So the first example, if we see the first line, the nudge store, it means like, okay, we're entering the store and we're just taking principle from different size, from different papers, and we apply it to a specific country, but maybe we're not making any changes. So totally the solution that we're creating doesn't fit to that specific country. So what do we have to do? The solution, or one of the solutions that we can come up with, is being a tailor. So when we're experimenting in a different country, then we have to, I would say first, we have to understand, investigate a little bit more, understand. So measure, try, measure, and adapt. This way we can make it, the experiments, we can make it appropriate to the specific country, and we can have a better solutions at the end. And I think that that's a very good thing. And of course, I also think that there are different aspects that we can consider. And I think that there is a gap also that we should fill in between what we do as practitioners and what academics do, because most of the studies that have been done in behavioral research, as we saw, they've been done in the USA or in general Western countries, but we have a need of people working as well in that specific place. So for example, companies like the one of Prakash or Oristica or Busara, or in other different countries, they are working from those countries. They're of great help, because we can actually combine the knowledge of academics and applying them in this specific country. So of course, there are several companies that are now doing this, and I find it so interesting, and I hope it will continue in the future. But my final takeaway here is that if we start understanding that behavioral science can actually benefit from experimentation, not only with different samples, but also in different contexts, making measures contextually appropriate, then we can have a deeper understanding of human behavior in not just in specific countries, but in general with the world population. And in this way, with this deeper knowledge that we have, we can also start designing better solutions for behavior change, which is finally our goal. And yeah, these are my ideas, and I'm very happy if you can share your opinions with you and with me and with you all as well. And thank you for listening. And I give it to you, Louise, if you want to say something or if there are already questions, because I didn't see the chat.
Thank you so much, Silvia. That's so interesting. We had Joseph Henrik as a guest in February when we spoke about, obviously, in deep about the subject weird. And so it's something we're all really very interested in. Lots of questions have come in. Before we go to the questions, I'd just like to give Prakash an opportunity to chat with you for 5 minutes, and then I'll be coming over to the panel question.
Totally. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Louise, and folks have joined from different corners of the world. We've also put up a small WhatsApp group, which I've shared on the chat box somewhere. Feel free to join it. Many a time people have told me I missed out the session because I got caught up. If I wish, I wish there was some reminder. So this is not, there's no goal to spam you. Just to make sure those who want to join, they get a reminder like 5-10 minutes before the session. Folks, we're about to start. It pops up on your phone, and then there's the only message you get in the entire week. I don't think there should be any more messages out there, right? So if you're curious, please feel free to join the group and also share the group with people who want to, join this kind of session, right? No spam out there, I promise. Silvia, thank you so much for joining us. Fantastic listening to you. Special slide from Dilip Soman's that dude walking nuts.
Yeah, you should go and see this. The Now Fast sessions are still online, right?
Yes, they're all
yeah, because it was very interesting and it's very related to this topic. So
Silvia, the one question, curiosity which I have, right? You have a multicultural upbringing, and both in terms of Europe and South America, and you've spent a good amount of time working with Heuristica in Peru. And Heuristica is one of the first companies out there in the whole Latin American continent, which is behavioral science. And from what I understand with my conversation with Pedro, it is you use behavioral science in multiple domains. It is not just public policy or not just marketing. It is give me a problem, and I'm going to find out how you can solve it using behavioral science. So the application are in multiple forms, is what I understand. And then right now, you're back in Spain, right? And you've just about started your second phase, third phase of your career straight out there. And I know it might be too early, but are there differences in the way that you've seen these places approach behavioral science, or in the mental models clients have about can behavioral science be helpful? Have you been able to do any kind of contrast already? And if so, are you comfortable sharing that with us?
Mm-hmm.
Not the company, but more the clients. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I have a very wide background that sometimes it's a little bit confusing, I know. But yeah, I actually started working in Heuristica 2 years ago, and it was one of the first companies in Peru applying behavioral science. And I always say that I was very lucky because Latin America was always something that I wanted to focus on. And with them, I could really deep in, because it was like totally a lot of projects, not just public policy, as you said, which is, I think, one of the main application of behavioral science. But we were also applying it with private companies, especially banks, so to make the financial parts of people better, making better financial decisions. And I still work in Latin America with projects in Latin America. And I don't have a direct example with what you're asking, but for example, as I was saying, I had this talk with an organization in Madrid last week, and one of the people there actually made an example for me. He was like, okay, I was talking mainly with Spanish audience about some specific behavioral science principles. And I don't remember what the principle was, but it was about moving to a place just to save some money. I think it's an article. I don't remember what it was, but very interesting. And the majority of people in Spain, they weren't willing to move to save this money. They were like, no, I don't care. I just stay here. I don't want to save this money. But when he said the same thing in Peru, he was expecting the same answer, and people were all willing to go to another place to save money. So the answer and the preference of what they were going to do was completely different. And he was surprised, no, because it was the first time it didn't have the answer. And there it's when you see, okay, there are some difference in cultures that I actually have to consider, not just when I talk to people, but especially when I have to implement things, because all the people have different realities, and you really have to consider different things. And another example that comes to my mind now is that during the COVID-19 last year, we were in Heuristica, we were working in a project where we wanted to I don't have the word in English, I'm sorry, to encourage people to wash hands in a poor neighbor close to Lima. And of course, it's a neighbor where they don't even have water, and it's very hard to maintain some preventing measures, no, that we had to do during COVID. And we were trying to, before designing a solution, we were also doing a qualitative research, and we were applying the COMBI model. And at that point, the authors of the COMBI model, they also released a paper applying the COMBI model specifically for the COVID-19. So we started to read it to see how we can use it specifically for the situation. And I remember that there were specific actions, not that specific behavior that people needed to do. For example, one was washing hands and then using some cream to moisture the hands. And when I read it, I was like, I cannot propose this to the people, an NGO we were collaborating with, because if I say, oh yeah, we don't only have to tell them to wash their hands, but they also have to moisture the hands afterwards, they're like, they don't even have water. We have to provide water first. So I cannot tell this. So I know that that paper was made for general public, but when you read it, like, you cannot just apply it as it is. You really have to consider what's going on in that part of it was a specific part of Lima. So it was like totally specific. And maybe in another barrio neighborhood would have been totally different. So it's crazy, but you really have to be careful of these local characteristics in this case in South America, but I guess in India too, no?
Yes, thank you for bringing up the hand wash example. The whole happy birthday to you, and then happy birthday to you, and you hit 20 seconds, and that's how you know you've washed your hands properly. Yeah. Was something of a solution which made sense to help people understand how long you need to wash your hands. But then the unfortunate realization also hit us, saying, dude, there are people who don't have hand washers in this world. Not everybody actually has a hand wash. And in this cultural context, giving this solution, which because we are in a very privileged kind of a background, seems like the right solution to give, doesn't even make sense. So how are we going to tell people don't do this? Or, for example, maintain a social distance, don't go out only when absolutely essential. Fantastic. But then you realize there are a lot of people for whom the economy, you have to work daily. You have to go out, you have to work hard. And only when you do that, can you cook your food for the day? So this kind of solution. So the whole idea of, do I even come up with a solution here, which doesn't really work for more than 60% of the world, it's sobering. But you are the guest, not me. I'm going to keep quiet now, Louise. Let's start the Q&As. A lot of lovely questions out there. But before I go, folks, and Silvia also, I want to share this one news. There's something very interesting which a couple of the club members are doing. You might like it. Krishleen, Sarah Sagiwal, Gaurav, Hamza, Kamila, and there's Priyanka. So they are doing something very interesting, which you might, and it's an internal project that the club has started with them taking the lead. And we'll hear from them soon. Something very interesting about behavioral science, cross culture, and getting people from different parts of the world to talk about behavioral science in a language that they understand better. But I'm gonna keep that much with a teaser now. Louise, all yours.
Very enigmatic, Prakash, fantastic. Yeah, I mean, behavioural scientists routinely publish very broad claims about human psychology, human behaviour, and there's no doubt that we have to recognise that there are cultural differences. It's making me think, Silvia, of the two examples that were in Nudgestock this year, which was that one was for a community that wouldn't have used anything in terms of diaries, and so they had the flower that bloomed once a year, and this is to remind the women that they were to have a specific health check. And then the baby blankets, which was in Nudgestock, which was that the length of the baby is much more of an indicator of the correct growth for the age. So they had the lines drawn on the baby blanket. So all you needed to do was give the mother of the newborn the blanket, and then they could measure the health of their child very successfully themselves. And they were so beautifully culturally specific. There have been lots of questions, and thank you everybody for all of your lovely kind gestures at the outset of the chat about having successfully run 50 of these sessions. We're delighted to still be here. Sylvia, I'm going to be bringing people in with their questions. Some of them look extremely complicated. Now, the first one I'm seeing here is actually more of a comment from Tony, but I think it's relevant. Would you like to come in, Tony, and comment? You were talking about context.
Right. Thanks, Louise. And pleased to meet you, Sylvia. So, yeah, I would think that the context variables would be more important than the cultural variables, because it seems like human brains are very similar. You know, we're all kind of, our brains think sort of the same way, and that we sort of have the same biases. We tend to have the same, our brains just break the same way. And so cognitive biases, I think, would be more universal, and the context would have more of an effect on the results that you're getting, because you're going to get something different interviewing somebody in a university quad versus interviewing somebody in a Peruvian barrio, for example.
Yeah, well, we have to speak. I would say that some of the behavioral science principles, now the fundamentals of behavioral science, are of course kind of universal. If we think about bounded rationality, it's kind of, we can say that all the people have limited attention, even if now we have different intelligence, but we have limited attention, we have limited time, we have limited cognitive capabilities. So in that case, we can say that it's kind of universal. But if we consider these differences, sometimes the way we study the cognitive biases, they can differ according to the cultural. And also, I think that I can share the paper, I don't remember, but they were saying that there are different factors that we can consider when studying decision making. And in this case, we can have the context characteristics, so like how the context you're making the decision, or the decision itself characteristics, so for example when we frame it in a different way, or the choice architecture, etc. And what we're missing is mostly individual characteristics, so what I was talking about, so cultural specific things that can make actually people change their preference, make different decisions, or behaving in a different way. So I think there are specific things that we can say they're universal, others that need to still be tested, and maybe in the future we can be able to say it's better. Now I still think that there is not a proper answer, you know.
Okay, that's great. You know, what makes me think, actually, while you were saying that, I was thinking, because you're doing some work in the financial industry, right? And there's a lot of work with financial apps on a phone, for example, and you don't have a lot of control over the context in which that app is used. You do have a lot of control over the choice architecture, like you said. Are there things that you can build into that app or into their interaction with the app that will bring about the right context? I don't know if I'm asking that question right, but how can you create a context? This is a totally different question, but I think this is a fun question.
To understand in which context people will use that thing. That's what you're asking.
Right, but not only to understand which context, but to create the context in which they will use it in an effective way.
Mm-hmm. If we consider like fintech, I think you can kind of see when they're going to use the app. What I would always suggest, there are different steps of behavioral science research, and most of the time, hopefully, you can start with understanding. So actually like dipping into what's going on in people's mind, understanding what biases and heuristics are working during the journey that they're taking with an app or a website or something. And there you can also understand in which context they are using it, because, you know, like most of the time we use the combi model. I think it's a very good one for understanding different factors that can influence decisional behavior. So if you use the combi, doesn't just give you insights on individual factors, but also context factors. So if we consider the opportunity element, then there we can see, okay, they should be using this in, I don't know, this app when they are home, but they don't have internet, as can happen, for example, in some Latin American country, they don't have internet in their phone and they cannot use it. So this is already a problem before the problem that you want to solve. So the first step is really going there and understand what problem you're trying to solve. Because if you want your users to use your app, you can make all the choice architecture that you want, make all the difference and use all the principles that you want. But if there are problems before, then you really have a hard time to make them adopted. So understanding and doing like a preliminary research, I think it's the most important step. And I've done different projects with different clients where sometimes they just do this kind of research or just quantitative research, and some they just experiment. The ideal would be to do everything. So you have an understanding of what factors, not just individual, but also context are influencing why they do or why do they not realize a behavior, they adopt a behavior. And then you can move to the design part and then experimenting. So doing RCTs or A/B tests or whatever it is. And then there you can actually apply some principles and, I don't know, laws of version and see how it works. But first, you have to understand, and sometimes being practitioner, it's hard because sometimes you have to really be in the middle between what's right, what's the gold standard in academics, and what you actually can do with your clients, what they allow you to do, and it's not easy at all.
Thank you, Silvia.
Thank you, Silvia. Thank you, Tony. Great question. You didn't even know it was going in that direction, did you, Tony? By the way, Tony has a super YouTube channel where he does some great book reviews, so hop over there to follow Tony on YouTube. Silvia, we have a question here from Shubham. I'm going to read it myself because I think he said further down he's got something, his audio isn't working properly, and it's a great question because if I remember rightly from Joseph Henrich's book, he said that one of the distinctions that was identified was that Western weird societies were more individualistic over community, tended to be analytic over holistic. And Shivam is saying, are there biases that are common between collectivist cultures and similarly between individualist ones? So that kind of leads into that conversation, doesn't it, Silvia?
Yeah, of course. Like we have to consider also this kind of cultural differences, right? If the culture is more individualistic, more collectivistic, etc., etc. I believe that it affects everything that we were saying as well. I'm not sure if there are research related. I'm pretty sure there might be in the social psychology or something like this. And if you have papers, please feel free to say it, because as I'm saying, I'm not an expert. I really want to learn more because it's interesting and it affects me like directly. But we have to think about it. So like if, I don't know, like a more collectivistic culture might react in a different way in front of, I don't know, some cues that we can give to test some principles. And it can, of course, relate to the fact that they have this kind of culture and they take more care about other people. So I don't know, they're more altruistic or things like this. This is exactly what I'm talking about, like these specific things that maybe they don't look like so important or not relevant, because we're studying the mind, so we think no, everybody has the same thing. But sometimes I even think that the language has something that can influence. And I work in Spanish and I speak English, I'm Italian. Sometimes I see that the way you say things can actually influence your way. There is an article that talks about how speaking different languages can affect your brain. And if you talk with your second language, you use more the systems too, etc. But all these different things affect our way of making decisions. And feel free to tell us if you have papers, because I'm not sure if there are research. Most probably there will be, but that's my answer. I think they affect cultural difference in cultural languages. And for example, like, I don't know, Prakash, if you have something, because in India you speak so many different languages, maybe there is something related to how it can change with behaviors of decision making. I don't know.
Thanks, Silvia. You're going to comment on that as well, Prakash?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me back in. I've just shared a working paper. Last I knew it was a working paper. The gentleman, Keith Chen, he was trying to do a research. The premise being, the present bias, the future self-dissonance comes from the fact that we see them as separate. What if there are languages where the future and the present are intermingled, right? In Spanish, for example, say, I do this tomorrow, right? Yo como mañana, very bad example. But the present and the future are mixed, and that's the way we speak in Spanish. And I think, if I'm mistaken, in Mandarin, again, the future tense, Priyanka, please correct me if I'm wrong in the chat box. I think in Mandarin, the future tense is kind of missing. It's all present, right? So the hypothesis is, in a world like this, when this is the way you speak, what kind of mental models do you, there is no past in Mandarin. Thank you, Priyanka, right? So in a world like this, how does that language affect your mental model? And what kind of impact that mental model has on the way you perceive options, right? So it is not straight up system one or straight two, but somewhere in the middle. I mean, one and two are again ways of explaining. There's no system in the brain saying one or two. So there is some discussion around that. That is something which I've been curious about. And when it comes to working with India, we have, I think, some 21 languages or so, last 18 or 21, which are recognized by the Constitution, and there are like hundreds more. And one of the things that we do during our research is we revisit questions by changing the language. So I speak with, let's say, Priyanka in English, for the first 10, 20, 30, 40 minutes. And sometime down the line, I change my language. I do the code switching, and I speak to her with her or any of her respondents in a different language. And then the words that they use, the way they talk about their experience or the point, that changes. There is something that we have noticed, right? We haven't done strict experimentation around those because our intent is simply to go on a straight hardcore consumer insights and see what kind of solution you can come from that. But it is something that we have seen regularly, and it's a part of the way we do our research. Switch languages, try to speak in 2-3 languages with the same respondent. That is what I can add. And I will go back and let's continue the Q&A. Yeah.
Totally. I was even thinking, no, if we consider, for example, HR, and when you present a job description, and it can be fair, are you right? It can be fair how women or men can perceive it. I imagine that this is also something that can happen culturally. So depending, no, how you write something, someone can take it in a way and someone else can take it in another way. And if perception changes, then also how you respond and how you behave change. So yeah, very much true.
Thank you for bringing that up. I vaguely remember something around that, the whole job description written down particular way. Let me pull it up while you continue the Q&A. If I can pull up here, I'll share it out here, right? But there was something I remember which says the way you prepare your JDs can intimidate women, or certain kind of people from applying for the job, which also helps me remember this was one phrase which I've shared earlier called the confidence of a mediocre white male, right? And the reason this particular phrase came up, if I just take a minute, but I don't want to take your life, then it's your show, Silvia. But
interesting.
The whole point of this phrase was this realization that for women, they anyway are suffering from a lot of anxiety, self-esteem, a lot of different problems, plus the imposter syndrome. And people from minorities, they already are feeling underrepresented, so they have their own struggle. And in that larger group, if you have someone who is just about showing the confidence in a group, in an office setting, right? Even though this person might be not as talented or as capable as the other folks out there, the fact that he or she can project this confidence leads his superior to believe, you know what, this is the right person for the job. And now that sets up a nice cycle of validation, because I got that validation from my superior. I actually end up rising, up the ladder. And Silvia and Louise and my counterparts and people from minority, they might be more deserving than me, but the game is stacked against them simply because I have this confidence. Now, we're talking about how cultures and realities of life can shape up the ways we look at the world. I want to leave with this, and back to the Q&As, Louise and Silvia.
Thanks very much. Now get away, Prakash. You're intimidating me. Now, I'd like to bring Priyanka into the conversation, because she was also asking about the use of language, the use of more emotional language. Priyanka, would you like to join us?
Yeah, I mean, I do know certain languages are more emotion, but my question was more like, this was something I got asked by a friend, peer recently, who said, like, do people in certain generations, now we're not talking cultures or countries, certain generations more prone to certain biases? Like, is our generation more prone to social proofing? And my only response was, but we have the information to do social proofing, so maybe that's why it's more sort of relevant for us. So, are certain biases more active, perhaps, because of, well, yeah, the context. Just
Okay.
Yeah.
I find it interesting, and you know why? Because it's also another thing, because we add another factor. It's not just like studying cognitive biases in different contexts, but also over time, because they can change, right? I'm sure that people maybe 10 years, 100 years ago, they weren't affected by social proof, but it can be true that generation now are more affected by social proof because we're more exposed to social networks. Mm-hmm. So we see more what other people do. we have, I think all the websites online, if you're in the digital world, there is review everywhere, how people are doing whatever. You can buy from apps and just basing your decision on what other people are buying or liking. So
Yeah.
it can also be with the, if we consider influencers, which is a new kind of, like messenger effect. Maybe we can start an influencer effect. And this is also something, because you can relate it also to brands. No, it makes a lot of halo effect when you like an influencer and you see it all the time, and then it influences your purchase, it influences why you like a brand. So it's like crazy how it affects us. And most probably, yeah, if you consider it, if we compare it to 100 years ago, it wasn't like this maybe, and now it is. So what it's important as well, not just context, but also over time, to see how it can differ, and if maybe we are more prone to different biases or new biases. Who knows? There are already so many, so I guess we will find new more.
It's like
Thank you for your
availability.
question.
It's availability heuristic
Yeah.
over that. So yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Priyanka. Thank you, Silvia. You're doing sterling work here, dealing with all of these very complex questions. Joanne has an interesting question, if you'd like to join us now, Joanne. And it's about a concept that she said was discussed in the book, in the Weird book by Joseph Henrik. Can you join us, Joanne?
Yeah, thank you very much, Silvia, for a really interesting and stimulating talk this afternoon. And it's great to hear from other parts of the country. But just referring to my specific question, I thought it was very interesting in the book by Joseph Henrik about how we in weird societies, because of the basically, I think the religious differences, how we feel shame and guilt, and how much trust we have in institutions and confidence in that in non-weird societies, it's more your kith and kin are more important, and you will experience intense feelings of shame if you don't support your kith and kin, while in maybe weird societies, it's more to do with your personal feelings of whether you're doing the right or the wrong thing, that can sway your behavior and your decision making, that and that's maybe a lot to do with sort of how we would view corruption and antisocial, what we would look at perhaps as antisocial behavior, that to them it supports their kith and kin, but to us we place more importance, or we feel more guilt if we don't abide by the sort of the institutional rules. So I thought that was a really interesting idea, and even the difference between Catholic countries and Protestant countries as to their attitudes to their attitudes to being more of an individual, and even just reading, that it was, Protestantism was really, spread the ability to literacy rates, because you had to it was your ability to interpret the Bible yourself was a motivator to read, while in Catholic countries, it was the priest that would interpret the Bible for you, and they led so it almost comes back to the idea, sort of like, as you say, of the context, like as you probably will know, Louise, in Ireland, you can come from different parts of the country and have in a small, tiny country, you can have completely different views, social, political, societal, economic outlook, and so I suppose it's that sort of, I suppose, heterogeneity that there is in societies you know, that you'll have such big differences between, you know, even in America, the way people vote, cities versus, you know, more rural areas, vaccination rates. So that it's really, I suppose what I'm trying to get to the point is that my second point is that context is so hard to probably pin down, because, you know, to quote the we're all individuals as such, even though you wouldn't think that at the moment with the way people are buying petrol in a panic in the UK. Like it's like a feeding frenzy. Everybody, like, you see a queue at a petrol pump, everybody wants to join the queue because we're social animals, and if we sense fear and uncertainty, we'll just do the most bizarre things. But so yeah, so I suppose I'm coming back to sort of the whole, like, you know, humans are irrational and you cannot predict how they're going to behave. But yes, this back to my original thoughts of like this shame and guilt, that we have different feelings, our gut reactions to things, that, you know, the way we look at maybe, you know, looking after our family in different countries is, you know, can lead to very different behaviors.
Thanks, Joanne. Silvia?
Yeah, totally interesting point. And it's very interesting, you know, like, it's actually mind-blowing if you think that you could have now grown up in another place and you would have had a different thoughts, different thinking, different way of behaving, etc. And this is why we're totally shaped by not only the culture we're living in, but also our group of reference, right? So if all the people around me behave or think of doing a different way, then of course we are more likely to do the same things. And it's also similar to vaccination, uptake. If my family is not doing vaccine, then most probably I don't do it as well. So the closer you get to your group, then maybe the more you behave like them. And of course, this is one of the things, before you get into the religious part, etc., it's also one of the things why it's important to know exactly your targets. You really have to know who you're talking to, because all the aspects are affecting the way they behave. And to the religion part as well, most of the time, I'm from Italy, so sometimes I had conversation where people told me, yeah, don't you think that in Italy, because the Vatican is there, you behave in a different ways at other people in other countries that don't have such a close relationship with the church, etc. And it can actually be like, you don't know, maybe different countries are Catholics, but we behave in a different ways, or where we think more that to behave good and well, and we have a deeper relationship with God just because we have the Vatican. Like, you don't know, right? You have to.
Yeah, I think there's a big difference between an Irish Catholic and an Italian Catholic. But again, you know, it's but there's commonality as well. That, you know, because I had a friend in my master's course who was from the Philippines, and we had such common things because we were brought up in the same religious faith. It was really, you know, from the other side of the world, I could understand what she was speaking about. We had a common language. But sorry, I know we're coming to the end.
Totally. Like, I lived in no, totally. It's totally right. I lived in the Philippines. Actually, I went there volunteering for some months, and wow. I was in a Dominican school with sisters that they were teaching to students there. And it was interesting because for me, they were even more like Christians and very deep, you know, religiously, and almost more than people that I know in Italy. So it was like, wow, a different cultures, totally far away, but you can see how the religion can shape the way they behave and the way they think. So you're totally right. I think this is another factor that we have to consider when we specifically, as you were mentioning, like studying trust in the organization, in the public organizations, specifically in governments, etc. This can have a big influence how we know how these things can shape our way of thinking, and it's very important. That's why I think knowing your target, knowing not this deep, like not just normal demographic, etc., but going deep and how these factors, these demographics can change their way of thinking, the wave of behavior. It's also something important. Yeah. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Silvia.
I want to come in
Thanks so much, Joanne.
here. I know we're at about the end of the time, but you're talking about languages and two things. Number one, Divya was saying something very interesting. I wanted to join in a moment. And before I invite Divya in, someone whose work we respect a lot, someone who was a guest out here, Biju, at some point of time in the past, recent past, he has shared this fantastic insight in a conversation where he pointed out that if you look at the clergy or the priest in religions, typically, even in Hinduism and even with Christianity, they have Latin or Sanskrit as the language to perform the entire rituals in. And he was saying, off late, I think, if I'm mistaken, the clergy, at least in India, have been instructed to use the local language when it comes to performing rituals in the church. And the question is, while that is beautiful on one side, because it's inclusive and all, on the other side, organized religion, there's certain mystique and charm to it, certain plate authority to it. So the fact that I'm speaking to you in the language you understand, does it take away the charm and beauty of the religion? Something to ponder. But Divya would like to join us and share your point of view.
Yeah, sure. Silvia, I was just thinking about, again, in the context of India and the fact that we have multiple languages and a lot of us are fairly comfortable in the English language also, right? So think of it in the context of, say, digital design. And the reason I bring up digital design is because I'd like to pick your brains too, because I work with some apps and we struggle a little bit with the simplicity of language and how can the language be used to communicate complex ideas and communicate it in a manner that is comprehended. Now, in India, you've got multiple languages, official languages, unofficial languages, etc. In this kind of complex environment, when you have an app that has to communicate the same thing, complex ideas sometimes, right? It could be financial information, it could be health, it could be finance, it could be education, any of those. What are the ways in which, or rather, what are some simple rules that perhaps can be adopted to drive this, commonality and understanding, or is that something that is not possible? Very often apps fall back into visuals and videos and logos and not logos, icons, etc. Is that the route? Just wanted to pick your brains.
Well, I think it depends of what you want to communicate, of course. I don't know if you're thinking like communicating something to all India, for example, or what specifically? What do you mean exactly?
Yes. So all, most of these apps are available across India, right? So you're an Indian citizen, you have an Aadhaar card, for example, you have a bank account that's based in India. You can download the app and start using it. So anybody in any corner of India can use it. And we're talking about, many languages in which people understand and one language in which we talk to them. Okay.
I'm always to the be global, but also be local kind of. That's my mindset, because I always think that to connect, you always have to be kind of close to the people you're talking to. So being too global, meaning like using too formal or too far away communication might not help sometimes, because I think of Peru, I'm sorry, but that's my reference right now. But if there are some parts of the country where they just speak native languages and they don't particularly use Spanish all the time, although Spanish is the main language. And I think that if you use very hard Spanish to talk to them, to communicate something to them, you don't really communicate anything at all, because it doesn't get them, right? And I think sometimes I'm thinking also an example of big companies for advertisement mainly. I know that you're talking about digital, but maybe I'm not quite sure if I have example there, but sometimes companies have problems communicating this relation to these specific things, especially if we think, I have an example from Dove, the beauty company, and they have, they represent the beauty with white people, right? And they had a lot of problems in Peru because people weren't connecting to the brand at all, they weren't buying. So they started a campaign where they started to include women from Peru. They also did it in Chile and in Colombia, I think. And they started also using language, like native languages. So saying beauty in different native languages. And although it's a global brand that everybody knows it, I think having the specific, like, you know, these local specific characteristics help you to connect more with your target. And yeah, I think it's already like years that we've been doing it. And I think it's always more and more important to keep with it, because being too general doesn't, I don't know, of course we have to always experiment. This is mostly the main answer, but being too general, especially with languages, sometimes doesn't really get to people. And also depending on how you want to communicate. Sometimes I see, no, you were saying you use, like, everybody here can speak English and it's a very easy language, and it's very informal. Sometimes you don't have to use articulating too much. But for example, in Italy, if you say things in an informal way, depending on the context, you can offend people. So you really have to be careful and maybe be more, you know, write a paragraph instead of saying it in one sentence, just because it's the way you have to communicate it. So yeah, I think I don't have a specific answer of what you were talking about, but I hope this can get you a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much, Silvia, for that great question. And thank you, Silvia, for giving such superb, detailed answers to all of the questions that have been put to you. You've coped admirably, and it's been a really interesting conversation that we've had today. I think we're all a little bit distracted by Mariah's pet on her lap. We don't mind Mariah, we like to see it. We like to see the pets in Behavioural Science Club. So now we're coming close to time. So I'm going to close up the event now. So thank you so much, Silvia, for joining us this week. Thank you, everybody, for joining us again to listen to the great insights from our guests. And in relation to the last conversation that you're having with Divya, leads in very well to our guest for next week. Next week, we are going to be speaking with Teresa Torres in Portland, Oregon. And Teresa is a specialist in user experience. And she's written a book called Continuous Discovery Habits. And the book appears, I haven't properly read it yet, but it appears to be a practical experience book about creating products, about the user experience, user research. So I'll put a little article up about that in the week about the book, so we can all see what it is that Teresa's going to be chatting with us about. She describes herself as a product discovery coach. So join us next week to find out all about Teresa, about her new book, Continuous Discovery Habits. Thank you, all of you, for your contributions today. Thank you, Divya, and I'll just hand back to Prakash to close up.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in. One quick thing about Teresa. So you have the series of books a product manager is supposed to study at different phases to get better. And when you're a Jedi level product manager, really good, that's when you're good enough to read and understand Teresa's book. It comes right at the end of the entire journey. We're extremely lucky she's going to be joining us. Please join. It's going to be fantastic. Silvia, thank you so much for joining us today and talking.
Thank you for inviting me. It was very nice and very, like, a lot of good insights. And I'm going to see all the links that you sent as well. I have to read a lot today.
Before you go, is there anything you want to leave us with, Silvia?
Well, I would like to connect with all of you actually, and I saw already someone like connecting with me in LinkedIn. That's amazing for me. I really like to talk to people and see like what you work on and different things. You know, I guess you all have different jobs, and I really want to know about it. So please feel free to contact me and to connect. And thank you so much, Prakash and Louise. It was lovely. And I hope I can join in the next session too. It looks very interesting, this one about UX. So I hope I can see you all soon.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone. Stay safe. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Have a fantastic
Bye.
weekend.
Thank
Stay
you.
safe.
Bye.
Bye.